Shalom. As always, all praises, honor, and glory goes to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rukaha Kodash, and double honor to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and salutations to the elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. All right, Lord, this one will be quick and edifying. This one will be about working out your own salvation, right? Because in this truth, no man can save you. No man can really, do anything for you in the sense of, your salvation and what you need to do, what we need to do as, vessels in this time, hopefully like members, earning that spot of salvation. Because even though it's predestined, and already the elect is already the elect, none of us really know, if we are going to make it or not. No matter how on fire you are right now, or whatever you may be doing right now, none of that matters if you're not going to be still doing that in the end. It's a continuous thing, right? Doesn't mean men don't fall short for, different areas and, get back up, and improve, in the areas spiritually that the Lord, allotted you to improve in. However, the earning of your salvation is, on this side right now. The things that we do, according to the scriptures. So this is Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, and it says, "Wherefore, my beloved, as ye have always obeyed, and not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence," right? So it's not just when you're amongst your heads, the elders of your camp or other brothers, that you're supposed to be, in the right mindset, working out your own salvation, thinking on, these things that have to do with salvation, right? When you're by yourself, when you're, when you're at work, when you're not, in the presence of, the men of the Lord, when because that could be, that's an example of, being in the presence of Yahweh Shemel Shai, because we have brothers around us, and elders above us as well, spiritually, watching, being eyes for Yahweh Shemel Shai. So men, tend to, do the right things in the presence of these men, or in the presence of brothers, so to speak. But this is telling you, not only in the presence, that presence you should, you should obey and do the right things. And it goes on to say, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So it's those things. It's your relationship with Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. You got to work out, your salvation. What's important to you, in this world, right? There's nothing more important than Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. There's nothing more important than this truth. However we do, have things that we tend to in this life, as we live in this wicked society, we work, we have to make shekels, we have families, some of us have families, immediate family, children, wives, people that we have to take care of, and we also have to take care of ourselves, which the Lord ultimately does that for us, but we're in the flesh, living out these things in this movie while we work out our own salvation. Right? All right, so verse 13 says, "For it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure." Right? And this goes into other things, that we shouldn't be doing, because, the cutting out of certain behaviors, it increases the chance of earning that salvation, right? So I had some precepts in Chat GPT that I just organized real quick. So the first one here is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, and it says, For For by grace ye are saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It is a gift of God. And first and foremost, to have faith is a precious gift, because that's a big part of the belief system. And the faith that we have in this time is a faith in, salvation in Yahweh Shai, in a righteous kingdom to come, the promises, all the prophecies, salvation in itself. you know Without faith, there's no belief in these things. Believing that the so-called UFOs are the chariots of Yahweh Shemel Shai, the angels or vehicles of the angels. Believing that when we see the chariots, those chariots are our friends. That's our nation. You know, spirits that are of the nation of Israel. You know, so with faith, it pleases the Most High, because without faith you cannot please Him. And faith is a very powerful thing. Because we don't see Yahweh Shai with our eyes physically in these times. But we believe through the Spirit, and that's faith. And it says, not of works, lest any man should boast. Because that's a gift first and foremost. And it goes on to say, this emphasizes that salvation is a gift from God and not a result of human effort. But it also suggests that salvation involves faith, which requires an active response from the believer. Right? So, spiritually and righteous, in the righteous sense of things, this faith is essential. It's relevant, it's important, it's righteous, it's holy, it's godly, it's separate, because people in this world, they have faith in vain things. They have faith in wickedness. They have faith in things that are evil, of an evil nature. So the next one I have is James chapter 2 verse 17, and says, even so, if it hath not works, is dead being alone. So it's referring to, even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead being alone, right? Because you have to then also work out your salvation, and that pertains works, being brotherly, going on the highways and byways and edifying the flock of Yahweh Shemel Shai, warning the people, being the mouthpiece of Yahweh Shemel Shai, being a part of the body, and doing whatever work you're allotted to do within the body, And it goes on. The highlight says, this highlights the importance of active faith, just as we are called to work out our salvation. This verse stresses that genuine faith will be accompanied by works, right? So it goes hand in hand. And this is Romans chapter 12 verse 1. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. And how do we do that? On the highways, on the byways. Out there is a spiritual battlefield, man. It's much more deeper than the eyes can behold. And these people walking by and seeing the men of the Lord preaching and warning, weekend after weekend, week in, week out, going on, doing the works of Yahweh Shemel Shai, making their body a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Right? So you have men that are allotted to do this. You have men that are allotted to come in and do this for a time, then fall out. But the elect will endure until the end, doing everything that I've read. Right? And the highlight of this verse says, this verse calls believers to live a life that reflects their salvation, offering themselves as continual act of worship to God, right? So it's pretty much, it calls believers to, show, action in earning their salvation, right? Doing the things to earn your salvation, even though it's allotted, it's already predestined to certain men, women, and children to be of the elect and delivered. However, we don't know. So some of those characteristics are, you know, working out your salvation, trying to earn your salvation, because it has to be acted out. So this is 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 10. Wherefore, the rather, brethren, give diligence to make your calling and election sure. For if you do these things, ye shall never fail. Right? And this comes in the way of reading, studying, doing videos, right? Because you can have, different ways. You have men that read a lot, or they may not do much videos at the same time. Or you have men that, do a lot of videos and they don't read as much. But we should be doing all of these things. We should be reading, studying and doing videos, collectively. That is the diligence. That is part of the works. You're going to want to do these things. You're going to have the spirit to want to edify, and learn more, read, teach. If you're a spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. So it's in us. We all have different talents, different measures, and that's all for Yahweh Hashem Yahushai to judge and determine. Not for any man to really look on these things and determine, oh, this man is this man is that. No, because all of these things are stumbling blocks at the end of the day. We've all had different lifetimes, different lifetimes and, different situations and scenarios, while prophesying, But we all have a measure in this time, in all times, and some lifetimes, not all lifetimes are the same. Some lifetimes your measure may have been greater. Or it appeared to be greater, because you have men that are speakers, you have men that are readers. Ultimately we all prophets are teachers, but there is an order and a rank and different levels of the spirit, measures of the spirit in these times, right? And regardless of that, we all have to make our diligence, and make our calling and election sure, by earning it. So the highlight says this verse encourage believers to be diligent in their faith and action to confirm their salvation, echoing the idea of working out one's salvation with care, right? So it's not how you start, it's how you finish as well, because these are things that you want to be doing in the end. You could be doing all these things all these years, and in the end you ain't doing shit. So it's really about who endures until the end, to earn that salvation, enduring all the hardness, in the flesh, different things that we deal with, that bother each and every one of us in different ways, so all right, so this is the last one, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27. And it says, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means which I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. So let me read this one again. So it says, this verse illustrates this discipline and self-control necessary in the, it says a Christian walk, ensuring that one's own salvation is secure by living in a way that honors God. Right. And that's what we ought to do. We ought to earn, our salvation, prioritize Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. Always, have that at the forefront of your mind, because, we're in this flesh. It's very easy to get distracted with other things, get distracted with our own measly, lives, and get caught up, in believing that, these things are so important. We do understand and know that we have things that we have to, attend to and, and handle, but it's never more important than Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. Being with brothers and men of the Lord, going on the highways and byways and every weekend is a priority, man, and working out your own salvation away from that, reading, doing videos, being brotherly to brothers, rebuking and also, counseling and comforting brothers in different ways. It's funny because recently there was big thing, with um, Gorilla Hebrew and counseling and all of that. I'm just using that to reference to say brothers in itself is enough therapy. He was doing marriage therapy and stuff like that. Brothers in itself, that's a form of brotherly love. That's a form of works, charity, just speaking to brothers and, and airing out things and, receiving the spiritual judgment or the correction, or the advice, or the comfort. It's very comforting and, it's very spiritually encouraging and it's very powerful, man. That's the point of the brotherhood. Yahweh Shem Shai never left us, without the things that we really need in these times. So that concludes this video. Point is, you gotta work out your own salvation. No man has any control over that. Yahweh Shem Shai does, and we are giving the power to earn it, in this flesh and do the things that we need to do, continuously until we're in the chariots, man. That's all we all really want, man, to be delivered. We're the only people on this earth that really need deliverance, and we're going to get that way of deliverance through our powers. Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai, Yahweh, who the world ignorantly calls God, is the true power and God of you so-called Negroes, Hispanics, Native Americans, and Yahweh Shai is the name of who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, which is our Savior. Yahweh Shai. Shalom.